Hi, everybody, and welcome to a new show about baseball cards called Overthinking Baseball Cards with a couple of guys who probably think about baseball cards way too much in ways that we've all thought about, but don't always necessarily articulate. So, my partner over there is Jason at Contrarian Cards. I am Dave at Iowa Dave Sports Cards. And let me tell you what the format of this is going to be. There's going to be one main topic. The big topic today is going to be about parallels, all things parallels. I don't want to spoil it, but we were talking about parallels and variations and all that sort of thing. But before we get into the main topic, one of us has been overthinking baseball cards. And so we're going to have a segment called The Leadoff, in which one of us comes with an idea that they've been thinking about, and the other person doesn't know what it is. So we're going to start there, and from there, we'll move into the main topic. So, Jason, what have you been overthinking about this month?
All right, Dave. So a little hesitant to go this cliche right out of the gate, but it's that time of year. You just got back from the National, and if it's all right with you, I'd like to pick your brain for a few minutes, specifically about what you took away from the National as it relates to baseball cards. I'm going to leave this wide open, take it wherever you want it, but a few just sort of setups here. What did you see that you liked? What did you not like? What surprised you? What stood out? Again, this can be about specific baseball cards, baseball players, vibes, energy. I mean, just anything that comes to mind. I've never had this opportunity to talk directly to somebody coming off the heels of the National like this. I've listened to recaps and all this kind of stuff, vlogs, saw a bunch of people standing in lines, but I want you to tell me what's on your mind as it relates to baseball cards after your trip to the National.
So the first thing that I noticed there, and then I noticed it the first day, and then again the long second day, I was still noticing it, is we've heard for years people saying, 90s cards, the rare ones, they're going to start drying up. And I think this was the time I really started to notice it. There were far less 90s cards out than there were last year and the year before. This is my third year in a row going. And for those that did have them in their showcases and at their booths, they were hoarded. So there were certain booths that had tons of PMGs or tons of essential credentials, but you rarely saw them scattered across different booths. That doesn't matter that they weren't there, but it was less than it was before. So I think we're starting to finally see the evidence that some had warned about, in which if you were not jumping on those rarer cards, and there are other rare cards as well, but sort of like those bigger ones that people tend to talk about the most in sort of the baseball card media space,
Yep.
like the rubies and the select golds and everything else, they were really concentrated or they just weren't there at all.
Interesting.
So I don't know if people are holding on to them or if it's just that a fewer number of people have more of them. But that's one thing that I noticed. Something else that I noticed, and I noticed it as well, but the artist formerly known as Ephus Pitch brought it up in his story the other day that I want to emphasize as well, is that there was some real dwelling on comps. Like it was comps. At one point, I saw a dealer and a seller basically shoving their phone in each other's faces, like up close in each other's faces, like that. So here's what I found. There's one that's like, here's what I found, and so I think that was really interesting. Is that there's this reliance on comps, in which and a lack of flexibility and a lack of creative thought in how to necessarily get deals done. Okay, so I wouldn't necessarily call the 90s thing negative, but the comps thing I would say is negative. So let me
Mm.
talk about something really good that I saw, which is there was just a lot of chatter about people's own collections. This is really fascinating things that they were collecting. And this was the place that really brought it out. So if somebody was collecting, say, just 80s cards and they wanted the legendary cards, like the 84 Donruss Mattingly or 83 Strawberry, or the 89 Upper Deck Griffey or the 80 Tops Henderson, any of those. There's just a lot of chatter about what people collected, and there's a lot of interest in what others had. So you'd be walking around the trade night, you'd be walking around the lobby of the Hilton, or the Hyatt or whatever hotel will happen to be, and they say, "Oh, what do you collect?" And people were actually really seemed genuinely interested in what somebody else was doing, and I found that really fun and really refreshing because it was an admiration and an appreciation for what others did, even if it's not what you did. You just would want to hear about what others were doing. And I saw this in areas outside of baseball cards as well, but this is a baseball card show. So I definitely saw that. Like somebody would like, "Oh, you got this collection of blank. That's really interesting." At one point, I was walking around, I think it was the Hilton on Wednesday night, and I could not believe it, came across 2 select platinums out of 30 of Griffey.
Mm.
Somebody had 2 of them. And it's like, I couldn't believe it, right? I could not believe that I had not seen not just one of these, but 2 of them. And we just struck up a little conversation. And he was willing to move them for the right price. He was sort of showing off and had some other stuff out. So, yeah, I think I was just really moved in a way by the appreciation that I saw that people had for others' collections.
Interesting. I think there's a couple bullish sort of indicators there. Specifically, the first thing you said tied to the third, which is rare cards, hard to find, and people are excited about them. And like that, like, is a lot of what I've been hearing from friends that went to the show and just people online that were there. Is like, if I could just sort of sum it up, like as a consumer of the national, from somebody that didn't go, it's like, had a great time, met a lot of cool people. People are excited about cards, but I can't find any cards I want to buy. Like that's what, like from the hardcore collectors, that's what I've been hearing. So that's interesting that you kind of highlighted that, especially with the '90s stuff. Yeah, I think, yeah, and it's got my, this is welcome to overthinking baseball cards because we're going to get into this, but it's got my wheels turning a little bit here. And I was thinking about it this morning, and I'm like, why? It's such a weird dichotomy of like, okay, on eBay you cannot give away cards. It feels like sometimes, like, and we'll go back to comps. Um, People just want to lowball everything. It doesn't matter if it's rare. It doesn't matter if it's like a highly desirable collector card. They'll offer 30, and if you counter at 33, it's no. But for some reason, like, so just where you have the biggest card show in the world, and collectors cannot find cards that they want to buy. That seems odd to me. And then on eBay, you have all of these rare cards available and nobody buys them. So it just, and I understand that maybe it's not, there's a little bit of difference here and there, but it's so interesting to me that dynamic exists. And what I was reading this thread on Blowout, and there was, I have no idea who it was, so I can't really cite them. But they made an interesting point, which is basically like a lot of these dealers have no idea what collectors actually want to buy, and they focus more on the highly transactional, quote unquote, liquid cards, like you were talking about, like, and that ties into comps and whatnot. But yeah, I think I don't know. I think it's really interesting. I think if you're somebody out there watching this and you are, an experienced baseball card collector in these 2000s, 90s eras with a lot of this rare stuff, I think you should feel pretty happy about that, especially if you've been able to hold on to it, because this stuff is hard to find. Like, it really is. And just everything I've been hearing at the show, like so many experienced collectors just coming home and saying, had a great time, couldn't find any cards. Like, that's been the most interesting takeaway. And I think, I think it's a bummer in some sense that, you can't go to the world's biggest card show and find a card that you want to buy. But in another sense, it's a good thing that there is genuine demand for this stuff. So that was cool, man. Thanks for sharing that. Really appreciate your rundown. Hopefully I didn't spoil this coming week of the Shallow End for you if you were holding that stuff back. But I was very interested to hear your takes.
Yeah, no, it's fun to talk about. And the Shallow End this week is going to be an interview. So nothing about the National anyway. Something else about that too is I agree. I saw the same thing that you saw with these people online saying, yeah, I only bought one card, didn't buy any cards, taken away from it. I did get a couple of personally, I bought a couple of aftershock cards, which I tried not to do this year, which is once I kind of made the purchase I was hoping to make. I thought I would be good, but then I was so amped up and
Yeah.
adrenalized that I then bought a couple more. It's like, oh, why did I do that? Why did I do that?
Yeah.
But nothing major, right? Nothing that will put too big of a dent in the wallet. But yeah, I came away with less than I came away with last year and the year before. And I'm just cycling down as I tried to see more people. As I became more disciplined, right? But there were some people walking out with stacks of stuff. So it's still going down. And people said they had a pretty good year. Some sellers were saying they had a really good year. So that's just good. You want people to be successful in their
Yeah.
business. But yeah, the longer I'm here, the less that I buy there. That's for sure.
Yeah. I think the most experienced collectors I know were the ones leaving with nothing. And I think that makes sense because they have equity in their collection. They have all these rare cards. It's going to be, no matter how big the card show is, it's going to be hard to find. And the more experience you gain as a collector and the better your collection gets, the harder it is to find pieces to add to it. So I think that makes a lot. All right, now on your side, do you have a plan for when you're going to reveal your pickup, or is that something you're going to do on Instagram or on your show, or what's the plan there?
Yeah, there's a couple that I will likely share on Instagram, but there's one sort of like a longer term play that I'm going to first try to get graded and see if it's a vintage card, so beat up. But my goal is just to try to get it authenticated.
Yeah.
SGC would not authenticate. They said it was too fragile, and they were worried about damaging it in the process. So I'm going to send it off to PSA, and if they are willing to do it, great. And if not, then I've got just the world's coolest binder card.
Okay.
Let's make that a tease, right?
Yeah, I like that. I like it when people explain all the details of a card without actually saying what the card is. I'm a sicko for that kind of. I think that's fun, so I can kind of guess now. And I like it. I like it when people hold it back a little. Buy the card and let the anticipation build, and then even for yourself, and then just show it later. So that's cool.
Yeah, all right. I walked up to this booth, and I saw this card just tucked underneath a bunch of other cards, and I could see sort of what the sticker said, and it said something like, I couldn't tell how much it was, but it looked like it was a really low cost on this card. And then it said, damage on back, make an offer.
Okay.
And so I was intrigued, and it's a card I thought about owning, but didn't really ever want to pay up for what it would cost to be a 1.5 or higher.
And interesting.
And I took it. He handed me the card, and I flipped it over, and sure enough, that card had been pasted in something serious to some sort of a scrapbook. And
I'm like guessing in my mind now what it could possibly be. Like I'm trying to think
and so it was really nice, really forward. He had the SGC sticker or the label next to it, attached to it, so you could see that they would not grade it. He was being very transparent.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what's the deal with this card? He says that he was consigning it for his brother-in-law.
Okay.
And just what an offer. So you do these calculations really quick in your head, like saying, do I even want this card? Yeah, but not at a regular price. So I made a really low offer on it. He goes, well, I can't go that low, and then he gave a slightly higher bump. And I said, sure, because I never imagined actually having this card. I kind of did, but not really. I didn't think it was really realistic. And then sure enough, he's like, I'm not sure. We shook hands, and
dude, those are the best, man. Those are the best. The never expected to have this card, and there it is.
Yep. And I will reveal one card that I did get. It was as I told my friend and national roommate, Paper and Chrome. It was a blank or get off the pot card.
Yeah.
Right. It was a card that I had a copy of my own and sold 5 years ago now, and wanted to get it back because every collector feels like as a collector, I just want to have this card back, but it's so readily available that I always pushed it off, and it was an 89 Upper Deck Riffy.
Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah, and I just found this really.
That's the perfect card to buy at the National. That's such a when I think National, I think that card. Like that is such a National card. I love it.
It was great. I got it in a 9 PSA 9. Beautifully centered. The sticker
What's the ballpark on a 9, just price wise, if you don't mind me asking?
They're going for mid to high 2s, and I got it for very low 2s.
Nice. Very
It was
cool.
toward the end of Thursday as they were close to closing, and probably around 5:45 or so. It closes at 6. I don't think he felt like negotiating much,
Yeah.
right? Um, so I got it for 210
Nice.
in value.
That's still wild that that card costs $200. If it can, I mean, it's a so like I guess it just speaks to the iconic nature of it. But I mean, I've never owned that card, but I think if I were going to the National, that's a card I would buy a card like that just because that would be such an awesome takeaway from that experience. And like whenever I see that card, I think of like those early like '90s Nationals
Yeah.
and that type of thing. So that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. It's definitely like I mentioned before, it was, if I had a different purchase earlier, that was the big earthquake. This was the aftershock one where I was 15 minutes from
Yeah,
escaping with a few extra bucks.
I like that. I've never heard that phrase before, but that's pretty cool. I've had a few of those aftershock purchases. Actually, I've had a lot of them in reverse. Actually, where there's like a sort of an after quake, sort of like another earthquake after an earthquake,
Hmm.
like that. Usually they usually come together. So, but all right, we should probably get into the meat and potatoes here. But no, thank you for that. I could keep talking to you about the National, but that's pretty sweet, man. I'm glad you had a good time.
It was great.
Yeah.
3 years in a row. Still on the fence about next year with family scheduling.
Yeah.
But we'll
Well,
see. We'll see how it goes.
Chicago. How far is Chicago? Are you able to drive there from
Yeah,
your
it's three and
from
a half
Iowa?
hours,
Okay.
so it's an easy drive.
Oh yeah, you're made in the shade then. That's awesome, man.
It's no sweat. So one
Yeah.
thing that kind of ties to our topic today about parallels is there was one booth that I went up to there, and they had a really wonderful value box set out that was not dollars. It was a $20 value box, but everything in the box was really cool parallels,
Oh, okay.
parallels, variations, but everything in there was numbered. And I ended up getting a card out of there because I collect Chris Carpenter, this old Cardinals pitcher.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I didn't know what it was. I had to look it up because I was not familiar with this variation or this parallel. It was a 2004 Bowman Heritage Mahogany out of 25. And I'm looking like, what is this? It was looked really faded on the front. I guess they're supposed to be faded. And it was hard to see the parallel. I'm sorry, the serial number on the back. And, you know, getting to what our topic is this time, this idea of parallels, this is the perfect value box for our parallels. Because here's the question that we want to pose, which is this: how might the hobby be different if, when Topps entered the market in 52, although they were there in 51 and a little bit earlier before that, but they really hit it big in 52. That's where they tried to make their splash. What if their big splash in 1952 was starting parallels from the very beginning? What if, in their trying to compete with Bowman in the bubblegum wars that you mentioned the book before we went on the air here, what if from the beginning there was the 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle orange out of 25, gold out of 50, blue out of
Mm.
150, purple out of whatever that is, 250, 299? How would the hobby be different if we were now in the 70 plus years of being parallels? That's a really big question. It's a lot to think about. But what do you think it says for the iconic cards that existed before there were parallels? And in what ways maybe might the hobby have evolved over the last 70 years if a parallels happened earlier, right? And it was not something that was brought in during the 1990s.
Yeah, that is a big question. And I'm interested to see like where your mind initially went with this because the first thing I started thinking about was would we even still have parallels? Would it have been like a reverse sort of evolution where we started out with manufactured scarcity and then it got so diluted as it trends now that it just people were just done with it and they just slowly over time demand diminished and diminished and diminished and eventually they're like, well, what's the point of making all these extra ones? Let's just print a set and throw it out there. And maybe we're in a state now where we're just going down to the candy store and buying a pack of cards. So that's kind of where my mind went at first. And then I thought about it a little bit more as we do here on Overthinking Baseball Cards. And I thought, okay, conceptually, what would that even have been at the time? Like, they wouldn't have, like, Cyberger,
Burger.
Berger. At the time, I don't think he's going to be mentally in the place of all, okay, we'll have the superfractor, we'll have the red out of five. And they're not even going to have, I'm thinking about this like real practically now, like they're not even going to probably have that printing capability. So what I'm thinking is probably on the box of 1952 tops, there's probably going to be some sort of little advertisement. It's going to say it's going to be like a Willy Wonka type situation where, hey kids, um, inside these packs, there's 100 special blue bordered cards. If you find one of these, take it to the clerk, and you get a free I don't know, some random toy. Get a free whatever, this, that, and the other. That's kind of where I went initially with it. Like it's going to be just real, rudimentary, real basic. And then another thing, you would likely never know if anyone ever got one of these. You would likely never know. You would likely never see one. No internet, no card shows. You're not going to see one pulled by the kid down the street. Whatnot, not a thing in 1952. They're not going to be pulled on camera, all this kind of stuff. So I can only imagine like the absolute just lore that would have existed on the playground, in the schools. Hey, did you see anybody with a blue one? That kind of stuff. So I kind of bounced around all over the place with this at first, thinking, at a very micro level, like what would that have even been like? And then at a more of a macro level, like where would that leave us now? So I'll pause there and kind of pass it to you and see, what were your sort of first thoughts on this topic?
Well, I think you're onto something. I really like what you said about the cards themselves might be a means to something different. So you mentioned find the blue one, get the faux autograph of Joe DiMaggio, something along those lines. Because that was a lot of those incentives worked back then. I don't think the parallels would have been numbered, but I think they could have said, saying find the orange one, find the blue one, find the red one. And I think we want to just pause here for a moment and just acknowledge that there were technically parallels in the 50s, right? There were the gray backs and the white backs, and in the 58, there were names that were in yellow versus names that were in white. And they became sort of things of not quite legend, but they were noteworthy, but they weren't really necessarily pushed hard by tops, right? It was something that people sort of noticed along the way, unless this was your business, and then the few of you who were in the business that you would tend to notice if you were a wholesaler or something along those lines. That being said, I think you're right. There were no shows. There was no eBay. There was no whatnot, thankfully. There was not a lot of things. And so you have to wonder, would they be released regionally in different places? Would some of them have been printed in the New York, New Jersey area? Would some of them have been printed down in Atlanta? Would some of them have been printed in Chicago or St. Louis or other big hubs, other big cities at that time, or Philadelphia or Dallas? Who knows where? And would they become something of regional legend, right? Where like, oh, you can only get the red ones, but those are printed in Toronto, right? And those were only released in Toronto.
Yeah.
I tend to think that they would have started to gain value or interest maybe like in the 70s.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, oh, you have to write away for it. Like, I'll send you 50 cents if you can send me a blue Willie Mays. Because that, or you send away a quarter. You hear the stories about people sending a quarter in the mail and getting a mantle back, right? And then there'll be pictures at the backs of certain trade magazines or comic books or wherever they happen to be. But I think that's the way it would have to be done, because the transport and the technology just weren't there. But I think it'd be not under the radar, but I think there wouldn't be a whole lot of interest until the early 70s, when you'd hear the stories of people setting up at Holiday Inns in Detroit, right, trying to buy people's old baseball cards. But I wonder if it maybe would have accelerated it somewhat, not a lot, but maybe those card shows would have started in the 60s instead of the 70s, because now you're trying to discover that rarity, because now the hunt becomes a little bit more complicated, almost like the way it is now, right? People will hunt for the rainbows, but what if the rainbows had been available 70 years earlier? I think people would have hunted those then, and I think we would have seen what happened in the 70s and the 80s maybe instead happened in the 50s and the 60s.
Yeah, that leads, like what you're talking about there, it makes me think like how would the pace have changed? Like the pace of demand and interest. Like my mind kind of jumped to the 70s too, as sort of, I don't know why, but like as sort of the, traction gathering type time. And if it had been like some sort of redemption program, I mean, like I agree, like I don't think it would have been like number to 100. They probably just would have been a bunch of, some variation, a different color, turn these in, get a free candy bar type thing, or maybe there's a bigger prize and a story gets printed in the local newspaper about the kid that found found all the red ones, every red, color card in the set, and turned it in and got like a free trip to the zoo or some random stuff. I have no idea, um, but yeah, and then that picks up steam, and then like you said, the card shows, all that kind of stuff. So, with that being said, if we're talking about like an adjustment in pace, and assuming this is something that Tops liked, that it did increase demand a little bit for the cards, and they sold a few more, so they did it subsequent years, changed it a little bit here and there. Kids were having fun with it over time. As we get closer and closer to present day, it it sort of puts you in a position of where, okay, um, do we still have the mystique of just sort of like, when I think about old baseball cards, I think about like, man, it's so cool that these survived. It's so cool that these were like just a thing that my dad, that when my dad was a kid, these were just floating around and that type of thing. I don't know if we still have that. That sort of aura around like those old cards, or if it's just different in some way. Um, yeah, so that's kind of where I'm drifting. What do you think about that, just in terms of sort of the impact on pace, the impact on just how we think about the old cards, maybe before we get into the impact on like modern, but
Yeah.
yeah, what do you think about that?
I think one wrinkle in all of this is, even though we are creating this alternate reality where parallel started in 52, I think it's important to remember legally that only Tops could create baseball cards for the most part from 56 to 81. When Donruss and Fleer jumped in. So there's a quarter century in which there would have been a chance of them becoming complacent.
Yeah.
And it could have been the same thing potentially for 20 straight years, right? Just the red, the blue, the green, just all the different colors. And yeah, there was that little burst of Fleer in the early 60s or whatnot. But would they have been pushed? And would things have been accelerated at all, since there was no incentive for them to be pushed? In which case, maybe we would not have seen, maybe instead of things being accelerated, into the 50s and 60s, maybe the real acceleration would have happened from the 90s into the 80s. And then when Donruss and Fleer, and eventually Upper Deck, but Donruss and Fleer, especially when they came in 81, at that point, they're already competing against the brand Tops that would have been already putting out colors. So they say, okay, what do we do now that's different? And maybe that's when they serial number in, or that's when they, one big thing that Upper Deck did, and I forget if it was 90 or 91, is they put pack pulled autos in with the Reggie Jackson card. Maybe that's what they do. Maybe they sign a contract with a player and then the autos get bumped up 10 years. I don't know about the printing technology that Upper Deck introduced, and then eventually Chromium later on, if that could have been done. I don't know enough about the tech to see if that could have been done earlier. But maybe it would have taken, maybe it would have taken until the early 80s for it to take another leap forward. And we're talking only about a 10-year difference instead of a 30-year difference or 40-year difference.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, also, I mean, again, alternate reality, but yeah, I mean, it's tough to sort of make that leap because just so many things were different. I mean, the biggest obviously being the absence of the internet, and just how that would impact just the lack of ability for these things to like for these trends to like travel and develop and that type of thing. But yeah, I don't know. I think those cards would be so expensive now. I mean, just kind of an aside, like, can you imagine like if one of those blue Mickey Mantles like somehow survived, the one that you redeemed for a candy bar, like somebody didn't redeem it and like they just had it still and it was in like minty condition. Like, I mean, that just talk about like just a stratospheric price. I mean, it would be unreal. And so many of those cards, and that's another thing. Is sort of a ripple. There's so many ripple effects here because now you're going to have the ripple effects on the market of, what we think of as like, you know, the best possible cards and that type of thing. If those had been parallels in the 50s and 60s, we might be talking about something that, is, you know, placed even above the Wagner and these types of things. Who knows? But and that, I guess that's another thing too. Like with the pre-war cards, you had all the different backs. But again, that's not what we're talking about necessarily. We're talking about like intentionally created variations of the same card for the purpose of not. It doesn't have to be for the purpose of redemption or turning it in. That's just kind of what I assumed they would have. That's what I assumed they would have thought of back then, just sort of something like that. But
I was just
yeah.
thinking about that corollary with the different backs of the tobacco cards, right? But that was based on a monopoly, right? That was based on the American Tobacco Company or whatever they called it, and everyone sort of having their own different regions and whatnot. But that definitely plays into what you're saying about the value for sure. If there are certain backs of certain tobacco cards, and this is out of my depth of understanding, so I'm not going to get too deep here. That cost so much more than other backs of cards, and if the red parallel was, say, for 53 tops, was only printed in Toronto, and every now and then somehow made its way down to the U.S. I mean, just think about what that Jackie Robinson 53 orange parallel would go for. If people had not exchanged it for the candy bar or for the poster, or just not thrown it away when they went to university or something along those lines, right?
Yeah. Yeah. My mind just, if we're talking about like regionally available, exclusive, maybe making it somewhere else, a limited number of them, and maybe it was, thousands, but even like had they printed thousands back then, like the attrition would have still been significant. Like there still weren't top loaders, no penny sleeves, not binders. These are still just being passed around, rubber banded, shoebox, all these kind of things. So the attrition is still going to be there. Let's assume, even if they were like printed like 20-1 or something like that, maybe there was one colored version on every printing sheet or something. I do also wonder, like, assuming like enough survived where they're, they sell a few times a year or something like that, or maybe there's one in every PWCC auction or Fanatics Collects auction every Sunday or whatever. I do wonder also, so what then is the impact on these base vintage cards? Because we already know there's a lack of rarity with all these Topps cards. The rarity is in the condition. We think of, manufactured scarcity in modern, and we think of condition rarity in vintage because the cards are readily available. You can find it any day of the week. Just depends on, can you afford it, and do you like how it looks, basically, with not with all vintage cards, but with just the kind of cards we're talking about. So yeah, so I wonder though if these sort of variations or parallels, enough survived to today, and just what that sort of impact would be on the vintage base cards, if that would suppress some of the demand a little bit. I tend to think no. I mean, I don't think enough could have survived to sort of like completely change the way that we see vintage. I think it still would have a lot of mystique, just a lot of just general lore around the card still, and it would probably just be even more enhanced, with these colored versions and whatnot, because there would have been such a cool story there.
So
I
you
don't.
would never foresee a scenario where at a card show in 2025, if this other universe existed, if someone goes, "Hey, check out my 52 Topps Jackie Robinson." Oh, wait, let me see it. Oh, it's
Yeah.
base.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that sounds kind of ridiculous, but I think there's something there, and I don't think you would see it there. But I think over time, and like you said, there was no real competition there, so maybe they weren't pushed. Maybe it was status quo for a while. I do think just the general dilution process would have sped up a little bit. We would have seen that a little bit earlier in the timeline, where we get to the golds earlier, we get to the hot dog parallel earlier, we get to the finite earlier. So if all the stuff is happening earlier, then this conversation becomes about, okay, where does it shift? Where does it end? Because right now in 2025, as we record this, I'm struggling to find a baseball card that I would like to buy. And the reason is not because there's not a lot of baseball cards to buy. It's because there's too many, and there's too many parallels, and I don't trust them to hold value. And that's very important to me. So I'm struggling to find these very specific examples of items that I can add to my collection from these current releases. And it's gotten so bad, and maybe not bad isn't the right word. It's gotten so out of hand, let's just say, that even cards from like 2022, 2021, 2020 are starting to look pretty attractive, just even a few years ago, considering just like how many less parallels there were relative to now. And the only reason I bring that up is because I wonder if that whole sort of thing, that whole sort of situation could have happened maybe 10, 15 years ago. And now, where are we? So what we're really talking about is, we're creating an alternate universe here, but we're sort of talking about reality too. It's like, where are we going to be 10, 15 years from now based on our current circumstances of dilute, 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 print more, 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 less meaning, less meaning, less meaning, less meaning, water it down, water it down, water it down. Had all that happened earlier, where are we, sort of a thing.
Do you think that if society is still alive and kicking, say 150 years from now, in 2175?
I was laughing because I thought you were going to say like 5 years from now, but
I don't want to politicize this show. So 150 years from now, things are, technologically advanced, but we're just, as a human race, we're still kind of just moving along. Do you think at that point, a 2018 Bowman Otani, so his first pack pulled card, base card, if it's still surviving, will have any sort of allure to
the
somebody
base card.
baseball cards 100, his base card 150 years from now? And the reason I'm asking this is because we were talking about the allure of base cards from the 1950s if there were parallels. So there are obviously there are parallels now. Do you think a 2014 base Mookie Betts or a 2018 base Otani or whoever somebody will be excited to get the base card, say 100 years from now?
It's wild to say, but the 2014, yes. The 2023 of whoever the rookie was, Bobby, I don't know who was 2023. Bobby Wood, no, he's 22. The 2023, 2024, no. Like, I think there's that big of a difference between 2014 and 2024, where the current base cards, and I don't mean this in like a negative way about anybody's cards that they own, but the current cards do feel meaningless, the base cards. But the 2015, 2016, 27, sort of getting in there, but they don't. And I think that speaks to just how dramatic the increase in production and again just watering down of everything has been. Like even again, just from like 2022 to now is I feel like things are very different in ultra modern, where I'm seeing you know 7 to 8 to 9 to 10 gold parallels numbered out of 50 for Francisco Lindor, the Diamante, the finite knockoff, whatever that's called, the wave, the Ray wave, the gold wave, the true gold, the gold foil, the gold with the big head, the variation gold spec. Like I just can't. There's nothing there. There's no meaning there. Now, a 2014 Topps Mookie Betts base card was still, I mean, it's not rare, but it still felt meaningful at that time to pull one of those cards. I wasn't in the hobby hardcore in 2014. But if I saw one of those at a card show and picked it up for a good price, I'd feel like I got a nice card or whatever. So yeah, 150 years from now, whatever, I think there would be a lot of meaning, but I don't necessarily think that meaning would exist for today's cards. For the Jacob Wilson base card from 2025, I don't think there's anything there. The Pete Crow Armstrong base card from 2024, I don't think there's anything there. I think it's gotten that out of hand. And yeah, I just, that's what I keep thinking of is like, I'm looking at cards from 2021 and 2022 now, and I'm just like, oh, wow, that looks so special, like compared to now. And that's 3 years ago. That just blows my mind. So yeah, I'll pause there. What do you think about people 100 years from now buying base cards?
It's interesting hearing you talk about those cars from 21, 22. I thought of you at the National. I passed and someone in their booth had a 2021 Clayton Kershaw Heritage Gold out of 5. I thought there's a car that Jason would stop and look at for a little bit,
I can't believe you found any of those there. That's shocking in and of itself.
Yeah, and that's the only one. That's the only one of those that I saw in a case, and it just really stuck out. And I don't think it was part of their collection because it didn't fit with what else they had, so they must have taken it back in trade or something along those lines. But to your question about what do I think 100 years from now, will these base cards matter? No, I don't think that they will, except maybe the best preserved ones. I don't know what people will think about grading, and this is not an episode about grading, but that might play into it. I have no idea what's going to be going on there. But what it does make me think about is what's next. Because if Topps for 70 years was just like, find the colors, at some point that either Topps would innovate when they got pushed by other companies, or the other companies would innovate, or both, right? And so that brings up the question of where would we be now? Where would the present day cards be? Because I tend to think that if the same old colors have been around forever, people would appreciate that. Almost like earlier this year when Topps put out Series 1 and said there would be no black flagship parallel. And folks went crazy about it. So I wonder if there would be sort of collectors would define themselves based on the color, saying, I collect only orange, only red, only black, only blue. And I want to pair my 1959 Bob Gibson black parallel rookie with my 2024 Paul Skeens black parallel rookie.
Yes, that would be sick.
Yep. And now you've got these legacy. Now you've got these legacies. This is interesting to think about it this way. And I wonder now if you'd have these legacy collectors, and then to translate this and to push it over now to Facebook groups, right? Right now you have a Facebook group, which is, 1990s through 2004. But what if there's a Facebook group for Topps Blue?
Yeah.
Facebook, and if the hobby would be, I don't think segregated is the right term for it, because it's not like the people who collect blue would be starting a West Side Story Rumble with the people who collect the red.
Right.
It would just be like, this is what I do, and my parents collected this color, and my grandfather collected the orange, so therefore I collect the orange. Right? It's like they say with Toyota, right? Toyota doesn't want you to buy a car because
Hmm.
you like the way the Camry or the 4Runner looks. They want you to buy Toyota because your parents had a Toyota and your grandparents had a Toyota. So maybe this would be a way to sort of keep people going. Maybe less people would have left the hobby if there was always that need to keep that run going.
If they in this alternate universe, if they could have like maintained the consistency too, like you were talking about, like a Gibson and a Skeens, both orange, and like think of the attrition rate. So like if you and tying it into like that family sort of legacy thing you were talking about, a lot, very few of these would have survived from the 50s. And if you were lucky enough to have like an orange or a red or a green, and like those colors still existed in modern day, if I had one of those, I would gravitate then towards the color that I had of the old card. So if I had an old, a Bob Gibson from 59 and it was green, I would be focused heavily on the green parallels in modern day to connect back to that Gibson that had survived all these years. That would be really interesting. And then to like look at those different attrition rates, like if there were regional exclusives, the oranges were in Toronto, the greens were in Dallas at these different, printing facilities or whatever. Maybe, you know, um, maybe one was, significantly, better quality and it didn't have any edge chipping, but all the oranges, have rough edges on the bottom. That kind of stuff gets cemented in lore and all these types of things, and that really drives collecting, drives nostalgia, or drives just the demand and the storytelling and all that kind of stuff. So that would be cool. I wish that existed in cards now. I wish they could behave themselves a little bit and let some of this stuff just simmer and just like take hold. Like you were talking about with the black parallel, they had to be talked back into doing it, but they got rid of the Mother's Day and the Father's Day. Those are not like high demand cards, but there is enough of a lineage there where what they replaced them with is just utterly ridiculous. I mean, beach balls and sunflowers and stuff, and just more other whatever. But um, so yeah, that's like the glass half full. Like that would have been very cool had they done it consistently, not overdone it, and just let it breathe, and then just let attrition and just the natural sort of rhythm of things take hold over time, and there would be some incredible stories there to tell. If like, oh yeah, man, my dad, he was, him and his friends were at the store or whatever, and one of his buddies pulled the orange, and oh my gosh, it was the only one they'd ever seen, and now I collect all the oranges, and that would be so cool, man. And yeah, so there's some definite possibilities of some fun stuff that could have came from that. So
Yeah, where my mind gets stuck in this conversation, where it breaks down, and I don't know how to move it forward, right? And just sort of spinning my wheels, is thinking about what advancements might have happened now and what might we be seeing now. Because again, hypothetically, so Fleer and Don Russ jump in 81, and they immediately push, Tops to do better, and they try to do better. And let's say they then bring in serial numbers. Now serial
mm,
numbers are there in 1983 instead of 1996 or whatever year those first ones popped up.
yeah,
A 15-year head start. At some point, they would be trying to think, okay, well, what's next? What's next? And thankfully, this is a low impact exercise with no real world consequences, right? But where would we be in 25 in terms of innovation and trying to keep people interested
yeah,
if there had been a 10, 15, 30-year acceleration of it? What would we be doing now? I don't know. And you saw, Fanatics trying to innovate the last few years. They had was it the cards last year in Big League where like
hmm,
Bryce Harper would follow you on Instagram if you pulled
yeah,
a card, right? Um,
questionable.
yeah, experience it. That you could have experience. You could redeem it for something.
Hmm.
Taco Fractor,
Mm.
which I swear to this day has to be some sort of a violation because they did not tell people what they were doing. Right, it turned out to be a Taco Bell for life coupon, whatever that was. Those are innovations, and I don't fault
No.
trying to do that. That was cool. I mean, cool. Why not try something different? Even the backward counting frozen fractor
Hmm.
was
I
fun.
like frozen I do like frozen fractors. I think the quality is getting worse every year that they make them, but that first year I thought those are really sharp cards.
Yeah,
I've never owned one, but some of their gimmicks are very cool. And
right.
yeah.
So if we're on the same trajectory, that would have happened instead in like 2008,
Hmm.
right? So
Exactly. Yeah.
what would we be doing now? I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm putting this big question out there without a good answer to it because maybe I'm just not creative enough to think of one, or maybe I just need a few minutes, but I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I don't know. I mean, my first instinct is like it would be a reverse. Like all trends have, gravity working against them and that sort of thing. So like my mind wants to go to a place of simplicity. Like if they completely, jump the shark a million times already, like would we be in a place where let's just make some really high quality, beautiful cards, like excellent card stock, excellent photography, very creative designs, very create just and print them in enough to just undershoot demand a little bit. But businesses don't want to do that because then they make less money. Um, so that would be my hope, is that things got so just ridiculous, over gimmicked, that they would just, all right, let's take a step back. Let's focus on the fundamentals. Let's make high quality cards and see what people think. So, do I think that would have happened? Probably not. I'm a more cynical person just by nature, so I think it probably would have been just gimmicks we can't even imagine, like you're talking about, like with the Bryce Harper follow and that type of thing. And I don't know. I'm sure that there definitely would have been good, interesting designs now and concepts and sort of different types of cards existing, but the fundamentals remain the same, where you have to package them with something else. So there still has to be something of substance in there. And I don't know. I mean, who knows? It's like weird to me to think of like the peak of, for a lot of us, people like our age, we think of the 90s and the 2000s as having just really, um, just high quality cards, like the refractors, the etching, just the overall shine, the creativeness of the inserts. If all of that had been moved up, and then we got to where we are now, and that type of thing, I don't know if I think it comes down to what would the market have done. Would they have rejected products? Would they have embraced just things, broadly speaking? So many of those components are just impossible to account for. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm kind of at a loss too in terms of where we would be today. It would just be obviously a shot in the dark. So
Yep. Well, I think since you're stuck and I'm stuck, maybe this is a good time to end this
yeah,
inaugural episode of Overthinking Baseball Cards. Jason,
yeah.
anything else?
No, I think we've sufficiently overthought this one. I'm very excited, if just for the viewers that are still here at the end of the episode. If we do the topic that I think we're going to do next time, I'm very, very excited to do it. And yeah, I won't say anything more than that, but it's an exercise I've been thinking about a lot, and definitely, I think it's one that people in the community and watching on YouTube, or our friends from Instagram, would really, really enjoy. So stick around for that on the next episode of Overthinking Baseball Cards.
Absolutely. And one thing I've neglected to mention at the beginning is this is going to be a monthly series. So one month we'll just let all that pressure build up and just have a really good conversation. So
Yep.
Jason, thanks. This has been fun. And thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.